There is something we need to talk about, and that is the most recent OCG Forbidden and Limited list update. I have already seen some of it, and I have already seen the most important thing, which isn't on here, but we'll talk about that in a second. They brought back Glow Bulb from 1 to 3. I'll say from 1 to 3 is not as big of a difference. Ip the World Chalice, I always call it Justicar. That's probably because of my brain is fried from Justicar True Heart in Hearthstone. Justice Shear, I don't know. From 2 to 3, I don't think makes a difference. So that's fine, just decluttering. Colossus from 1 to 3, believe it or not, I actually like this change. Hear me out. I think Colossus is a card that should either be banned or at 3. Because think about it, the difference between one Colossus and more Colossus, Colossuses, I don't know, only matters for pure Thunder Dragon. Any other like combo pile that plays Colossus only plays one anyways. If they want Colossus to be legal in the game, you might as well put it to 3 to give Thunder Dragon, like the pure deck, the maximum amount of access. I still think it would be okay if they banned this card, but I don't personally think there's a real reason for the card to be at 1. Predaplant offers Scorpio from 1 to 3. That's probably fine. You can play a bunch of copies with Lone Fire Blossom anyways. Orpheus Scorpio feels like it was a card that was just a little ahead of its time, you know? Back in the day, it was crazy the stuff you could do off of that one card. Nowadays, it's kind of normal that some cards can do that stuff, you know? Like if they keep releasing cards like Snake Eye Ash, then it'd be kind of stupid for a card like Offers Scorpio to be at 1, so that's fine. Time Seal goes from 1 to 3. That doesn't matter. That card is not good anymore. Semi-limited, all the Dragon Rulers. This is completely fine. They could have put them back to 3, but here we are. Quick Fix from 1 to 2 is the first one that I'm not a big fan of, simply because my personal opinion on Spiral is that I think Spiral is one of those archetypes that should remain dead for the rest of this game's lifespan. I don't think it's gonna do anything, but I'm not a fan of Spiral. Bonfire from 3 to 2 is understandable, but it's a relatively small change. The fact that Rhoda is limited in every format is kind of like whatever to me. Like, I personally don't believe that a card like Bonfire or Rhoda or whatever is the reason why something's broken. I think searchers are fine, but I also think that it's fine for searchers to be at 1 or 2. Like, I don't personally care that much about Bonfire specifically. I don't really have like a huge take on searchers, whether they should be at 3 or 1 or 2. I personally don't mind Bonfire, but I also don't mind Bonfire being hit in some way, shape, or form. It's a very OCG hit. Plush Fire coming back to 1. This was predictable because it did receive that errata. It is now a heart once per turn. That's completely fine. A card that probably will move up the list even further if I had to guess in future updates. They brought Kirin back. That is way too late, if you ask me, but obviously that's fine. I mean, the card is already off the list in TCG, and it didn't really do anything. This is completely fine. Let's talk about these next two together, actually. SP Lil Knight and Beatrice are both going to 1, which people are memeing about, because obviously most meta decks, if anything, are using 1 of these cards, and that is true. If these cards stay at 1, I think these hits are kind of silly. However, I think this is just a continuation of what they did with the previous list, where they put SP Lil Knight to 2, which was a hit that made even less sense. But at the time, we predicted, well, those are kind of like warning shots, right? They're like telling people, hey, we are aware that SP Lil Knight is super popular. We're throwing it on the ban list step by step, which is the same thing that they are doing with their unhits since a couple years, right? They've been doing like, okay, we think this card can come off the ban list, so we're going to put it to 1 and then to 2 and then to 3, which is the direction that the Dragon Rulers are going, for example. And I think with these sort of extra deck staples, they're doing like the reverse order, right? If you look at only this ban list in a vacuum, like this doesn't make any sense, right? Like 1 Beatrice, 1 SP Little Knight is not a good change because it's not going to impact 99% of decks in the format, except the 1 BA player in all of the OCG. I'm kind of hoping that this is like a warning shot. I personally think Beatrice is a card that deserves to be banned at this point. Anything that Beatrice has appeared in has done some pretty crazy stuff with her, except for BA in recent years. So I think it's time to move on from Beatrice as like a generic card. They should have just made it less generic somehow. SP Little Knight, on the other hand, I actually am kind of a fan of SP. I kind of like the kind of game states that SP Little Knight creates. It is incredibly powerful, don't get me wrong. It is a really, really strong card. I don't know if I would advocate advocate for it to be banned just yet, but it is something that I think SP Little Knight is definitely a card that is powerful enough to be banned. I think we can all agree on that. Whether we would like it to be banned is a different question, but it's definitely good enough and popular enough for it to be a candidate at least. Snake Eye Ash going from 2 to 1, just getting rid of 1 Bonfire and 1 Snake Eye Ash doesn't feel that great. It's a very OCG kind of change, you're right. First of all, it's not going to do that much, and second of all, it's just also not a great change. You know, like the Snake Eye deck as it is in the OCG just has evolved into this direction where the Fiendsmith cards just still make it hyper consistent and have a lot of extenders and all that kind of stuff. So losing 1 Ash and 1 Bonfire, it doesn't hit Snake Eye hard enough, I feel like. And I think people are going to be annoyed by that. Number 40, Gimmick Puppet of Strings. I can only guess that this is because of the Gimmick Puppet FTK. I'm not actually 100% familiar with how that FTK works. I've heard people say that it is still possible, which would make this hit seem kind of dumb to me personally. It makes it a choke point. Okay, maybe it makes the deck more vulnerable to like certain hand traps. I don't personally know enough about the Gimmick Puppet FTK to know if this is a sufficient hit, if it even does anything, or if it does nothing. Some people say it does something, some people say it does only a little bit or nothing. We'll see. To begin with, the Gimmick Puppet deck isn't even really a thing. I think it popped up once in the YCS, the best of one. I think one or like a few of them top, but like in regular OCG meta breakdowns, I don't really see the Gimmick Puppet deck at all. Sangan Summoning from 3 to 1. I think this one is among the best hits on this Forbidden and Limited list because it puts one of the most toxic cards in the Tenpai deck down to 1. I personally don't have as much of an issue with Tenpai. I find Tenpai kind of boring, but that's about it. The only card I have a real issue with is Sangan Summoning. That's the one card that I find the most annoying, the most broken, the least interactive in the entire deck. So this card being limited is fine. It is still technically searchable through Hydra, right? Hydra can search spells. The problem is if you don't have this spell, Hydra is a lot less likely to even resolve in the first place because then your opponent can just use their effect veilers or impermanences or all that kind of stuff on the Hydra. You've still got 2 copies of Sangan Summoning with Terraforming, right? But it's significantly less often in your opening hand, right? Which that is when it's the most broken, is when they just have it to protect their starter. Good change. Very good change. Summon limit from 3 to 1. Obviously, we don't have to talk about it. Phenomenal change. Floodgate on the list, always a W. Very nice. I need to show you something. Hold up. I think it was like my second game in the Master Duel Worlds qualifiers this weekend, which is why I laughed real hard when I saw that ban. Hold up. Just look at it. Lost coin flip, obviously. Played Paleo, obviously. Full Royal Horus, obviously. This card's Guardian Slime. Needless to say, I closed the game after. I guess I'm happy with that ban. Rip Bozo Catapult Turtle, I suppose. And then Kaiser Coliseum going from 2 to 0, which is obviously also a really good change. Usually, I'm a big fan of those lists where a lot of stuff happens. Those are usually the most hype ban list updates, right? This one, however, I personally think it looks big, but it's actually super small. I'll tell you the cards that you can basically completely ignore on this ban list. Catapult Turtle. Ignore that. Kirin and Plushfire, ignore those. It's cool that they come back, but they won't do anything. Beatrice and SP to 1, ignore those completely because they're being played at 1 99% of the time. Gimmick Puppet of Strings, probably irrelevant. All the Dragon Rulers, completely irrelevant. Spiral Quick Fix, irrelevant for now. Bulb, Justishear, Colossus, Offris, and Time Seal, all irrelevant because Colossus at 1 was all that the decks needed. This at 2 was completely sufficient. Glow Up Bulb didn't even see play, but like it's still a good card. 16 out of these hits are completely to be ignored if you're looking at like meta relevance. This looks so much bigger than it is. The relevant hits, Coliseum banned, good change. Summon limit limited, good change. Could have been banned, but fine. Sangan Summoning to 1, good hit. And then we have Bonfire and Snake Eye Ash being just a slight slap on the wrist for Snake Eye. We don't even have to sugarcoat it. That is just not sufficient. At this point, like that is just not enough. That's a weak ass hit. The way they are handling Snake Eye is pretty atrocious. Even though I am aware that Snake Eye is not the only deck in the OCG right now. The thing is still out of the top decks in the OCG, Snake Eye is like the most dominant. Yeah, it's kind of like the tier limit treatment at this point. You're right. It's kind of like the tier limit treatment where that deck's been too relevant for too long. I personally think a hit to the Fiendsmith engine would have been great. That is my main concern with this, because if it wasn't for Fiendsmith, that's another thing. These Snake Eye hits would actually be like kind of sufficient, right? Like not perfect. They wouldn't be my preferred way of doing it. But if Fiendsmith wasn't like super good in Snake Eyes, we would be looking at these Snake Eye hits a little differently. But the fact that like the Fiendsmith cards just replace the Snake Eye cards for more starters in that deck just makes these kind of like not sufficient, right? I'm scared of Fiendsmith, I'll say it. I'm just hoping they hit Snake Eye a little harder for us on the next ban list. That's really what I'm coping for. I think this is kind of meh of an OCG ban list. Let me know if you think differently or if you agree. And now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the thing that they didn't do, the thing that I was most hyped for them to do, that I've been coping on for the recent weeks and all that kind of stuff. They didn't hit Maxx C at all. I told you guys it could go two ways, right? Either they made Molchami Pirellia because they wanted to get rid of Maxx C, or they thought they needed another additional copy of Maxx C, which if they wanted to replace it, that would have been base. If they wanted to have another Maxx C, that's absolutely crazy, right? So we have the first indicator that apparently they didn't plan to get rid of Maxx C. They just wanted to make another copy of it, which is crazy behavior. Funnily enough, for us in the TCG, this is going to end up being fine because guess what? For us, Maxx C is already banned. So we just get Molchami Pirellia, which in my opinion is a well-designed card. So for us, it's cool, right? We don't have Maxx C. We don't have to deal with that shit. So TCG is eating good. Master Duel, I'm a little worried about, but Molchami is significantly different in best of one. So we lose on the side of card design. That is another concern. I've said this before. I do think that sometimes they design archetypes in the OCG with the idea that, well, Maxx C is gonna balance them. My favorite example of this is Super Heavy Samurai. The only reason why that deck was so broken was because it loses to Maxx C and because it can't play Called by the Grave. So they were like, hey, it's okay if we make this combo deck crazy because Maxx C is gonna balance it. And then for us in the TCG, well, guess what? Maxx C did not balance it. I'm still very happy about how fast they handle Super Heavy Samurai. Yeah, in the OCG, it didn't even work. The deck was still dominant for way too long. Yeah, disappointing. This ban list overall, very disappointing. A lot of hits, very few that matter. No Maxx C. I can't even imagine being an OCG player. It's rough out there. I'm half expecting TCG to ban Molchami off rip. Nah, Molchami is completely fine. The card is not even going to be like super staple. It's going to be like a side deck card, I think, or going second and against certain decks, which is what it should be. Also, a lot of decks will give you like 1, 2, or 3 draws off of Molchami, but no deck has to completely stop playing the game. Plunder? I mean, yeah, dude kills Plunder. If anything, that's a benefit.